Hey guys, I'm back. I had an absolutely sick time at Rosa, just one of the very best festival experiences I've ever had. I'm going to be talking about it a lot more in the next few days, probably do a video just on the festival itself, what it's all about, my connection with it, another video on my own experience, and probably do a video talking about why festivals are so amazing and how Rosa links with that, because it really encapsulates everything fantastic about going to festivals and the whole experience of just letting loose and having a sick party. So yeah, that'll be coming soon, but first of all I wanted to get stuck into a trip report that's been sent in to me by Jaden that really caught my eye because it actually involves him watching the end of Evangelion, which is my absolute favourite film of all time. If you want to know more about that, check out that video I did. It was one of my more popular videos back in the day before I started doing the trip reports. It was my, an intimate analysis of the end of Evangelion, I believe it's called. So if you want to know more about my thoughts on that film, please check that out. It's very old, I sound so high-pitched, it's actually ridiculous, I sound like I'm fresh out the womb. But it still is a great overview of what I feel about that film. And I've actually watched it on LSD as well, which was an unbelievably profound experience. Such an emotionally powerful film that it really can get to you when you're on psychedelics and you can analyse it even deeper. So, without further ado, we'll get into this one. It's good to be back. The only two people in the universe. An LSD trip report. Preamble. There's one thing that I had always reminded myself every time I was about to take LSD. No two trips would ever be exactly the same. I'd only dropped 3 times before this occasion, and every one of them had gone wildly different. None of them had produced any substantially negative experiences, however. About 2 weeks prior, my last trip had been my first one I had taken alone. It went so well that it had completely changed my view of myself. I was convinced at that point that I could do anything. I'd gained so much confidence. I was fully aware of the possibility of a bad trip, but I felt as though I could handle it very well. Obviously I wasn't going to purposely throw myself into a situation that would induce a bad trip, but I was completely convinced that I could handle it without a hitch if it were to happen. What a fool I was. T+0 hours. I waited until midnight to drop. I put the 150 UG gelatin square under my tongue and went to turn on Spirited Away. Everyone in the house was asleep. I believe it was my girlfriend who had recommended that I would watch Spirited Away during my trip, and I decided that this was a great idea for my come-up. I tried to time it perfectly so that I would start to feel the effects halfway through the film, when things would start to pick up and get more interesting. By all means, I was in an incredibly familiar environment, my own bedroom. My LED lights were turned on, cycling through the rainbow. Everything was set up perfectly for me. T plus 1 to 2 hours. Around this time I felt the first wave, like I was beginning to ascend. It started in my head, like the danger sense that a deer feels when they've been spotted by a predator. This made me smile. I'd waited a long time expecting it to take effect, and here it was. I relaxed my body and let myself start to ascend higher. I was still fully invested in the film, but my attention was beginning to divert elsewhere. I realised how perfect an idea it was for me to watch Spirited Away during my come-up. There isn't a single film out there that gives me as much joy and euphoria quite like the one this was giving me. And to make matters even better, it gave me a good metric to determine time. I knew that my perception of time was bound to melt away as the night went on, so it was good to have something to root my mind in the conveyor belt of time. The more the film progressed, the more intense my visuals got. Since I was in such a moderate dose, I wasn't expecting to completely lose my mind, but the screen in front of me became slightly obscured by the expanding fractals that appeared. The vibrant colours and beautiful imagery went with them perfectly, and everything felt amazing. I'd never experienced such positivity before. The ending of the film practically moved me to tears. When it was all over, I lay back onto my bed and stared off into the ceiling, laughing at the light that protruded from the top. This fractal-like patterns in my ceiling extended down to me, and I reached out to touch them, to no avail. I had no idea what time it was, and I decided that I would ground myself again by putting on another film. Another that I had wanted to save for a trip like this one. The end of Evangelion. I was fully aware of the emotional power that the end of Eva had. Even while sober, it had completely broken me. I decided to go along with it, however. I wanted to have my mind completely blown. The visuals were getting so much weirder at this point. Everything in front of me started to wave around and change hue. Everything felt so saturated. Everything on screen was clearer than it had ever been before. I'd risen from my bed and was on my hands and knees directly in front of the TV, watching everything with wide eyes. I'm thankful no one was awake. My door was locked and all, but I was on my hands and knees, in my underwear, watching a film a mere 24 inches away from the TV. Eventually, I returned to my bed, as my position was rather uncomfortable where it was. The end of Evangelion is, in my honest opinion, a much more contemplative film than Spirited Away, and by the time the film neared its conclusion, my brain was completely overwhelmed by thoughts, far too many to name right here. It all blended together to form a sound much like that of TV static. By the time the film ended, I sat in complete silence in front of the screen. It was like I'd been submerged underwater. T plus 4 hours. Around this time, I got a call from my girlfriend. She lives 2 hours ahead of me, and I was surprised to see her call. She knew that I was tripping, because I told her my intentions before she went to bed the night prior, and I knew that she had wanted to hear me speak. I answered the call, and I was incredibly relieved to hear her voice. It reverberated in my head, and made me feel absolutely euphoric. While we talked, I went to turn on another movie that I've completely forgotten the name of at this point. I got 10 minutes into the film when something completely unexpected happened. The internet went down. It manifested itself first in an exceptionally long loading screen, which in itself was unusual. After 5 minutes had gone by, I started to worry. Then, the app I was using to watch my film completely closed. I was absolutely destroyed. I began to tell my girlfriend that the internet was down and how sad I was. It was the moment where everything started to go downhill. The implications of the internet being down became all too clear to me. I now was convinced that I had no idea what time was anymore. There was nothing to ground me in reality. I could have checked my phone, in retrospect, but I wasn't thinking straight. I decided that I would simply wait it out. I put my phone on my chest and lay down, staring up at the ceiling once again, mindlessly communicating with my girlfriend about the night I was having. I don't know exactly what prompted this, but I began to think long and hard about the internet going down. I began to get paranoid. I was running around inside my own head. I could hear all of the words that my girlfriend was saying to me, and was able to formulate responses, but my mind was completely elsewhere. I was paralysed. The absurdity of the situation caused me to burst into uncontrollable laughter. It must have lasted for 5 minutes. She just laughed along, likely confused out of her mind. When I finally calmed down, I decided to check outside of my window. I couldn't see the house that was right next door. All I could see was pitch blackness. Panicking, I leapt up and checked outside of my door. Nothing. I closed my door slowly and told my girlfriend what happened. She giggled. It made me happy to hear that she was responding, but it worried me for some reason. I came to the realization that, to her, this was all in my head. She would never understand what was happening. What I was experiencing was an absolute reality. I expressed this to her as best I could, but as I expected, no result. We continued to talk, but I began to sink deeper and deeper into worry and doubt. I felt like I was completely adrift in the middle of nowhere. My room was a vessel, floating in empty space. I kept communicating with her to show her that I was still there, but I was losing my mind very, very slowly. I had absolutely no concept of time, no concept of anything. I felt like I would be stuck staring at the fractal-covered ceiling forever, and that the sun would never rise. It was terrifying to me that I wasn't able to communicate to her exactly how I was feeling. I tried many different ways of explaining my situation, but they all fell on deaf ears. It saddened me greatly knowing that she didn't understand. I felt like I was the only real person in the universe. I was completely outside of reality, floating away from everything. At some point, I decided that I wasn't having it. I sat bolt upright and had an epiphany. I realised that there was some conspiracy behind all of this. A lot of this section is relegated to what my girlfriend told me when I had sobered up. I thought that the internet going down was a test that I had made for myself. Everything about this was a test in my eyes. I remembered way back before I dropped, thinking I could handle a bad trip if it happened. Now, It was starting to happen. I could feel my paranoia heightening. I heard these distant whispers in every corner of my peripherals. I tried to shrug them off by talking with my girlfriend more, but they were always there. I kept frantically checking outside my window, still seeing nothing. I figured that at this point, if I could convince myself to come back to reality, it would happen. I kept repeating to my girlfriend that I was testing myself and I was winning. I wasn't going to allow myself to sink into nothingness. The sense of worry was starting to fade away, but the whispers were still there. This period of time felt like eternity. I was endlessly trying to convince myself that I was okay, and that I would come out of the other end, if I ever did. Things were starting to go well. I began to emerge ever so slightly. I told my girlfriend that I was winning. I won the game that I had created for myself. She only giggled in response, but it made me incredibly happy to have her with me. For whatever reason, I went to check my TV again, and I realised something. There was a disc in my console. I was ecstatic. I loaded the disc, having absolutely no idea what it was, and after a few minutes of loading, I got my answer. It was the 3rd season of SpongeBob SquarePants. I had no idea how the disc had made its way into my console, but it felt like something that could only have come out of a story. I can imagine my girlfriend was incredibly relieved to hear that I was no longer consumed by paranoia. My visuals weren't as intense as they were earlier, but I could still see the ever-changing patterns in my vision. I still had absolutely no idea what time it was, or even where I was. As far as I was concerned, my room was still an island completely unto itself in the middle of nothingness. But it didn't worry me as much. I felt like things were okay. While the show played on screen, I calmed down more and more, and began to think again. Without the internet, without time and without location, I felt like there was nothing keeping me grounded in reality. There was nothing keeping me tethered to the outside world. I was indifferent to this though. It didn't scare me like it used to. I began to tell my girlfriend that it all made sense. She was the only other person in the universe. Her and I were the only 2 people that were left. I knew she wasn't going to understand my ramblings, but I took no issue with this anymore. I was now content just thanks to her presence, even though she was nowhere near me. The 2 of us were fated to be like this. I told her that we were the only 2 real people in the world, and I was eternally grateful for her. I'm quite sure that if she wasn't there to keep me grounded with her presence, I would have dissolved into nothing. I told her that she was quite literally everything to me. She was the only thing that reminded me that I was still existing in this world. It was these words that she finally began to understand. I felt my bond with her deepen just through one experience. I was, and still am, so incredibly thankful that she was there to anchor me. I finally felt as though we were on the same ground again. We must have talked for hours, but to me, it felt like we'd spoken for days or weeks on end. I hardly even noticed when the sun finally came up. One would think of all the magic of the epiphany would have worn off after realising I wasn't floating in the endless void, but only became that much more special to me. She was there for me when I was certain that absolutely no one else was even around. There's no reason to feel like you're alone. There's always someone there to ground you. If I took anything else away from this trip, it's that I'm not invincible. I'd held on to the notion that taking a trip alone did not make me impervious to the influence of my own mind. Never had I expected something so trivial as the internet going down to almost toss me into a bad trip. It also taught me that you don't even need a high dose of LSD to completely overwhelm you. Hell, I was only on 150 micrograms and I felt the very essence of my reality almost disintegrate into pure nothingness. But it's important to remember that there's nothing to be scared of. Even a negative experience like this allowed me to look at my life through a clearer lens. My experimenting with LSD certainly didn't end there, but it made me all the more conscious of the ways that it could affect me. I have no doubt in my mind that I will eventually find myself in a situation where some other, more significant part of me will irreparably change, but I have no plans to resist or fight it. It will come naturally. Thanks for reading.